Welcome and good evening everyone to tonight's meeting of the Services Delegated Committee. Before we commence the meeting, I request that all mobile telephones are turned off or switched to silent. Thank you. My name is Councillor Nick Stavrou and I chair this committee. I will start by introducing my fellow councillors. Seated to my left at the horseshoe table in the council chamber are Councillor Jim Park, Councillor Felicity Sinfield, our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Lisa Hollingsworth, our Mayor, Councillor Wes Gold, and on the other side of the table, I start with Councillor Cynthia Watson, Councillor Gary Thompson, Councillor Jane Adders, and Councillor Bigger, who's attending online, and Councillor Franco. I also acknowledge our CEO, Mr. Phil Storer, seated to my right, and our Coordinator of Governance, Ms. Kirsten Ritchie, to my left. There are also other officers in attendance tonight, and they will be introduced as they present their reports. The purpose of the Services Delegated Committee is to deal with issues relating to the provision of human and physical services and council infrastructure. For those in the gallery presenting this evening, when we come to the agenda item, and there will be one agenda item tonight, it will be introduced by an officer. I will then call you one by one to come forward and address the council. I will ask speakers to sit at the top of the horseshoe table, and I will invite those against the officer's recommendation to speak first, followed by those in favour. When making a submission, you are requested to present your viewpoint clearly and concisely on why you agree or disagree with the proposal. You may suggest an alternative approach, which will satisfy your concerns. And this is critical. Please do not repeat what earlier speakers have said, and keep the discussion focused on relevant issues to this evening's proceedings. There is a limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, and that includes councillors. And as chairperson, I reserve the right to vary that, but I will seldom do. At the 2.5 minute mark, I will ring a bell, which will indicate that you have 30 seconds to complete your presentation. After you have spoken, please remain at the table while I ask if a councillor has a question for you. And for those in the gallery this evening, I would like to take the opportunity to remind you to extend due courtesy and respect to each other and to the committee as a whole. This includes remaining quiet while others are addressing the meeting and not disrupting the decision-making process of the committee. And to finish off, I'd like to encourage all submitters, officers and councillors to speak directly into the microphone. This will ensure that everyone can clearly hear the discussion. Thank you. With that, I will move to the next part of the agenda. Apologies. Ms. Ritchie, are there any apologies?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, there is one apology. Councillor Gillies.
Thank you, Ms. Ritchie. That be noted. Councillors, confirmation of the minutes. Councillors, can I please have a motion to adopt and confirm the minutes of the Services Delegated Committee meeting held on the 18th of March 2024 and April 8, 2024? Councillor Gold.
So proposed, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gold. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Thompson. Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you.
Persevere with me tonight because there appears to be something on the screen coming in and out, so I will work it out by the end. Councillors, for the benefit of the movement and the seconder, are there any objections? There be no objections. I put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Those in favour? Motion's carried. Thank you, councillors. Declaration of conflict of interest. Councils and council officers, are there any conflict of interest that you wish to foreshadow for the matters in the agenda tonight? There be no conflict of interest. We'll move to the substantive part of the agenda, which is item 3.1, Burundara Tree Protection Local Laws 2024 Community Consultation. Mr. Alban, Manager of Urban Planning, will be presenting that report. Please proceed to the... Thank you, Mr. Alban.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Item 3.1 relates to proposed changes to Burundara's Tree Protection Local Law of 2016. A proposed new local law, which is primarily focused on strengthening penalties applicable under the law, has undergone a public consultation process earlier this year, and we had 163 submitters submit to that. These have been reviewed and are broadly in support of the changes proposed to the local law. The report prepared by officers considers key themes and potential actions in response to the submission themes. A detailed response to each of the submission points is also included as an attachment to the report. This evening's item gives an opportunity for Council to hear from submitters before Council considers a recommendation on the new local law at the Council meeting of the 27th of May this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alban. 8 people have indicated that they wish to make a submission on this matter. 6 are against the recommendation in the report and 2 support the recommendation. Once I've announced your name, please sit at the top of the horseshoe table, and if a submitter is not present when the name is called, we'll move on to the next speaker. Again, I remind the submitters that there's a strict limit of 3 minutes, and commence your submission with your name and suburb which you reside. Only your suburb, please. The first person who wishes to speak is Mr. Paul McKillop, followed by Mr. Lee Norton. Mr. McKillop, thank you. Start with your name and suburb.
I'm Paul McKillop and I'm from Glen Iris, Boroondara.
Thank you. Please proceed.
I'd like to start with saying I'm neither for nor against. I might have been written down incorrectly.
Thank you for that. Thank you for correcting the record.
And I do have some visual disabilities, so I'm just moving the mic. I hope that's okay, into the light. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. I'm starting with who I am. I'm a counsellor that worked in mental health a long time, and I worked in the disability sector, but I looked after my mum with long-term mental illness and right up till her end stage of life with dementia. And it was at that time I had the encounter here with the tree protection law. So, I wish to ask you guys, why are you motivated to do what you do? And I know that I'm motivated to do what I've done for all sorts of altruistic reasons, and one of those is making a difference in our community, making a difference in our world. And I hope you are too. My submission is 103 and 109, and my statement to you is, are trees more important than people? Are trees more important than people? And if so, why? My mother's situation before she died, many years before she died, was walking down our driveway, which is dug up by a tree, very successfully, a very good tree, good gum tree. And she said to me after she fell, as I'm pushing her in her walker, seated on a walker, and she's toppled over and fallen back on her head on the ground. She said to me, "Get rid of that tree for God's sake, Paul. I'm too frail now." She's got dementia. She has no problem articulating what the issue is. Please get it removed. Well, I haven't been able to do that for her. And I have lots of other neighbours and friends that we've had a lot of associations with that have disabilities. And I'd like to pose this question to you. If there was an usher here in this room and somebody came to you...
You have 30 seconds, sir.
Sorry?
30 seconds.
Okay. And somebody came to you and said, "Righto, you cannot see right now, here's a mask over you," but the ushers packed the stairs against all the exits. I'm wondering how you would cope. You would certainly have an understanding, but I'm not sure that arborists and others are qualified in terms of human need and welfare to judge what's appropriate in terms of what those people's needs are. And so I urge you to look at that submission and consider Bayside's response, which is have somebody like a a manager for community services look at applications and not just an arborist. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKillop. I'll- 1 second to see if there are any questions. Councillor Franco, followed by Councillor Gold.
Thank you, Mr. McKillop. Could you explain? I'm personally a little bit familiar with the circumstances of your personal circumstances, but to clarify for others and perhaps for myself as well, would you be able to articulate why, for example, you couldn't simply address the infrastructure issues and remove the trip hazards if the tree roots are creating trip hazards?
Yeah.
It would be a simple thing, I think.
Yeah, the tree roots are so large that it's, pavement like this that you're trying to get over. So people in a wheelchair can't even get over it. So removing the tree, all the things that councils have proposed at different times to us are impractical to the needs of the mobility of people with disability and frail-aged people. Because you need, a proper pathway that's not going to be dug up again if you lay concrete. It should be concrete if you can afford it. Their suggestions seem to be go around the tree and just put gravel. Well, I've got a mate who has been a plumber and he says, well, this tree's digging up the sewer and you've got to get rid of it. I can't fix it otherwise. But he rides a very low scooter that's motorised with a disability. So he fell off a roof some years ago and he was very fortunate to get through Royal Talbot and he comes and visits us regularly. He cannot get down the driveway. If he had to get through gravel, he'd never get down the driveway. People in a scissor lift chair, mobility, very high chair, cannot get down our driveway. And the difficulty is that the concreters say we cannot fight against that tree. That must go. There's no way to give you a proper access for the people you're talking about because it'll just dig it up again, even if we lay concrete. So those two options are very simple, but it's not going to work until the tree goes. I love trees. I, sat in the car as a kid and looked at Gippsland driving up there years ago, and I used to say to my dad, why don't these farmers plant more trees, And nowadays, it's common practice. They think, yeah, we will.
Please address the question because...
Yes. Yeah. So I have other friends, another guy who has certain medications, and it means that he has to have special shoes. And those shoes make sure that his heel doesn't roll, and similar to the sort of shoes my mum had to have. And he's fallen out of his car as soon as he stood up into the garden from the tree roots. He's done it 3 times. It's extremely embarrassing. Watching my mum fall over is extremely embarrassing. Neighbours, we have a lot of them who are elderly with sticks and walking frames and all sorts of stuff, and they can't get down there safely. My wife's sump in a car hits the driveway, bumps all over it. They're quite high. We're talking up here. Height from this table.
Mr. McKillop, there might be a follow-up question. I'm just going to ask Councillor Franco whether he's had his answer to the question he originally asked.
Yes, I think I've had my answer.
Thank you, Councillor Franco.
Thank you.
I've got Councillor Gold with a follow-up. Please try to respond to the question directly,
yes.
in fairness to everybody else that will follow you. Thank you.
Mr. McKillop, thank you for your presentation. My question is very similar to Councillor's, the previous question you've been asked. But I would extend by saying, did you get any advice from someone regarding replacement of the path and pruning of the roots of your tree?
Yes.
Because I've had a very similar problem and we pruned the roots and fixed the path.
And the concern is that they just say, look, this tree will fall over. The concreters say, we will not do the job, it's not worth it. And I say, what, even if you put reinforcement in it like you would have to, no, it's not going to work. It's just going to start crumbling. Just one slab of concrete's moved that far in the last 6 months, upwards.
So can I just clarify?
Yeah.
You got advice on the pruning of the roots of the tree?
Yes, council.
And the organisation who advised you?
No, council suggested those
Council
things.
suggested.
Yes, yep. And it's just that you know that that would have to be done for any concreter, and they say the same, but they all say the tree has to go in terms of giving safe access for people who are elderly and
Thank you,
disabled.
Mr. McKillop. It appears Councillor got satisfied. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just a very quick question, Mr. McKillop.
Yes.
Did you appeal the decision to
Yes,
council?
right through, and consistently, my concern is, I suppose, that council staff are working within the parameters of their law, but each time nobody is cognizant of the needs of people with disability and access needs, and so and frail elderly people with what we've been talking about. So it's very concerning.
Mr. McKillop, sorry, my question was, so you've appealed and you've been through an application process,
Right up to the
and then you've appealed, and then
right. Yes, that's right, and I've been advised that the only right of appeal after one of the directors wrote me a letter is to the Supreme Court.
Thanks, Chair.
And I
That
feel
answers my
that
question.
that's not
Thank you,
reasonable.
I think Councillor Thompson has had the answer with satisfaction. Thank you, Mr. McKillop. Look, I feel for your story, but we've exhausted questions. You may return to the gallery. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You may return to the gallery, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Naunton, followed by Ms. Helen Slay. Thank you, Mr. Norton. Please proceed with your name and suburb.
Good evening, Lee Norton, Balwyn North, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm here to broadly support the recommendation, but I said I'd be against it because of some particular concerns, so that I think it may need a little more work. But broadly, contextually, it seems to me clear that, from the consultations, that the community and council are generally on the same team here, that the community wants to protect trees in order to protect, among other things, the amenity of Burundara and the heritage that's provided by trees, and also the benefits to the community, particularly with climate change, of continuing to have shade, reducing the urban heating effect, and so on. And that's all reflected in council documents. And contextually too, it seems like the major issue here, from the way that I'm reading it, is that the state laws create significant restrictions on council in terms of the penalties that can be applied in the one instance, and also the planning regulations provide a great incentive for developers to moonscape and build McMansions on large blocks, which council does not have a lot of control over, and creates an enormous incentive to remove trees and therefore tree canopy. This is occurring not in just Burundara, of course, but across the metropolitan area, resulting in significant tree loss, generally speaking, across the metropolitan area. And there's evidence, as I've seen it, that that tree loss extends to private land within Burundara. So my question, and this is really an appeal, I suppose, is to see whether it's within council's power to do more to advocate to the state government that this situation be corrected. And if things are happening in that area already, I think it'd be very good if council could publicise better with the community the fact that the strength of the advocacy to state government that is continuing, and to do more of it. In particular, with respect to the specifics, the inclusion of the requirement to obtain a permit for a tree to be removed subsequently, I think is a very good one. But there are a couple of things that have issues with. The notification to neighbouring properties for a significant tree, and a recent example of this, I think, needs to be extended, and a community consultation process put in relation to significant trees, and that could be part of
Mr.
the
Norton,
law.
I'd like to finish and to wrap it up, please, if you can.
Thank you, that will
be
be all.
fine.
Thank you very much for your attention.
No, no problem at all. If you can just wait to see
Yes.
if there are any questions. There are no questions. You may return to the gallery. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Norton.
thank you all.
Cheers. The next speaker is Ms. Helen Sly, and followed by Mr. Greg Salter.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity tonight. I will begin by saying I broke my foot 10 weeks ago walking on a footpath covered with leaves, and I stood on a seed ball.
Just for the
So-
record, could you say your name and suburb,
Helen
please?
Slee, Camberwell.
Thank you very much.
So I fractured my foot 10 weeks ago walking on a footpath covered with leaves and a seed pod underneath of a plane tree. Broke my foot, and I've still got a problem with it, which is a big issue for me. But never mind, I'm moving on, and I would like to say I do not agree with the proposal tonight because I think it's pointless. $4,000 or $2,000 is meaningless to anybody who's got a big development. So, I mean, I know you're restricted because of state government, but it's not going to make a difference. I would like to point out that the legal removal of trees is also incredibly significant to loss of canopy. And with aerial photography, you can't distinguish squat shrubs from canopy trees, so it's even probably more than you believe. I know a lot about trees. I consider myself an expert. Soil volume, positioning, type of canopy. There are many, many trees. Measuring the trunk doesn't really signify the canopy size. A lot of trees are columnar, no shade, no real benefit. So that's very important to note. What can council do about it? Well, I would think from the start, on your first page on your website, you could have a section described as house gardens. And that, if you go to that section, then you get a lot of information about the types of appropriate trees to plant, the sites, where, advice, and all from arborists, not from planners. Planners are not arborists or horticulturalists. They have other qualifications. I think it would help because in the last 15 years, our demographic group who's buying into Burundara, for various reasons, do not value trees, do not consider them important. They remove them. They put in, ground cover, whatever, but they don't appreciate trees. It's very difficult to teach someone what's beautiful about a tree, what benefits from a tree, but that's what has to be done by council. They have to counteract the problem, and that is the real problem. I do support what the gentleman's talking about, removing inappropriate trees. I agree with that, but I also say at the same time you should plant an appropriate tree. I would like to state that eucalyptus trees are completely inappropriate, unfortunately, and best left in our magnificent bush because they create so many problems and they are shallow-rooted, and I had 2 80-foot ones in the past who dropped enormous branches. Fortunately, it was before these laws came in. So hopefully council will be creative on how to educate our new homeowners on what we love about trees. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lay. There'll be no questions. You may return
you.
back to the gallery. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Salter, Mr. Greg Salter. Could you please begin with your name and suburb, sir? And
Greg
by
Salter,
Mr. Ian
Hugh.
Huntley. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors and Mayor. Just want to bring up a couple of things. We used to live in another house in Kew many years ago, and we had the municipal arborists come out and inspect a tree, which we thought was dangerous. And the arborist came out, gave us the whole opinion the tree was fine and stable and everything like that. 2 weeks later, it fell down and crushed our car. Had 2 young kids at the time, so you've got arborists coming out giving advice. The tree falls over 2 weeks later, yet we weren't allowed to cut the tree down. It doesn't add up. Anyway, that's just an insurance claim, I suppose, at the end of the day. The cross-section of the community that you've got, 168 people have made submissions or consulted with, you haven't posted out anything to any of the residents. You've only done it through Facebook and a couple of other social media means to get out to people. Have you thought about contacting people that are currently in the planning stages of building developments, or not developments, or renovating their houses or extending their houses, and there's trees out there? You go and change the laws, all those plans and everything they've done and their dreams are going to disappear because you've all of a sudden reduced the size of the trees, the tree trunk, into canopy trees. So obviously smaller trees become canopy trees, which is a large portion of their land, and they may not be able to continue on with what they're doing because they can't remove the trees. Has anyone considered that side of things when you've only haven't posted out to all the residents and told them what's actually going on? You've just gone out to 168 people, or had submissions from 168 people. I don't think that's very fair for the amount of rates that people pay in the area, that you're actually decreasing the value of their land by not letting them be able to develop it to what they could without even notifying them in writing first. I think that's pretty poor from the council's point of view, not notifying everybody. You're also decreasing private property rights by increasing the canopy over the blocks. If any of you have driven down Park Hill Road, I did on the weekend after reading this report, there's properties there you couldn't do much with. There's that much tree canopy from the neighbouring properties and the properties that have the trees on them. If that house was to be knocked over or a new one put up, or it had to be knocked over because it's old and couldn't be renovated, there's not much you could do with the properties. They're worthless. They couldn't be developed or a new house built that meets the dreams of the person that lives there. There's a whole heap of those scenarios. Right, there's other places where canopy trees don't affect the properties. The other thing is canopy trees from neighbouring properties hanging over your property, and then a protection zone around that, then that also limits the amount that can be done on the block as well. So you might buy a block with no trees on it, but you can't develop that block because you've got canopy trees from the neighbouring properties that are hang over, and all of a sudden your arborists say, no, you can't come out and put your basement in or build out that side of the house or anything else along those effects. That's pretty much...
The 3 minutes are up, so it's pretty good timing. Thank
pretty
you,
much
Mr.
where it is
Salter.
at that. It's basically, I don't think you're advertised enough. I didn't know about it until I was told by someone. And that's the only reason I'm at this meeting, is I got rung up on Friday night and told about the meeting.
I'm glad you made it. Thank you, Mr. Salter. There are no questions, councillors? No questions. You may return to the gallery, sir. Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. The next speaker is Mr. Ian Hundley, followed by Mr. Anthony O'Halloran. Mr. Hundley, if you can begin with your name and suburb, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors. I've got some photos. Perhaps the first one could go up now. Thank you. Yeah, as a general view, I was disappointed that there was no open or informed dialogue at the outset of...
Mr. Hundley, could you please restart, just for the record, your name and suburb?
Yeah,
thank you.
My name's Ian Hundley and I live in Balwyn North. As I was saying, I was disappointed there was no sort of open dialogue backed up by data to discuss these issues before it was sent off to the Your Say part of the website. It was something I asked for, but it was disappointingly not done. My general view is that, as I said in a note that I sent to all councillors yesterday, that the community understanding of the local law, I think, is pretty low. And the process for resident involvement needs to be decomplexified. Resident understanding and participation is really a key, I think, to the recovery of canopy tree cover in Boroondara, and we're not really in that situation. I've written my own guidance document for people to use when they identify situations where trees might unreasonably be at risk, which I also sent around to you over the weekend. If we could have the second photo. Is that photo 2? Oh, sorry. Yeah, just a general observation on the first photo. That was basically of a tree in Balwyn Road in Balwyn North that was poisoned with glyphosate about 2 years ago, which I reported to council. And I think this is a very good example of a case where the council should highlight publicly in a fairly comprehensive sort of a way. The second photograph relates to an illegal tree removal in Hoskin Street in Balwyn North, fairly close to where Councillor Watson in her area. One of the issues that we do need, and if you can show photograph 3, is looking again at the protection of the root zone of canopy trees. That tree is a very large tree that died basically because the developer was scarifying in the root zone and also heavy vehicles going over another part of the root zone. And my understanding is that there's not proposed to be any move on that in relation to canopy trees at least. So we need effective protection of the root zone of canopy trees. The next photograph is of a replacement tree which is doing extremely well, I'm glad to say, which isn't the case with many other replacement trees. So this may be a resourcing issue for council, where we have situations where trees are replaced but die. If you can put up the next photograph, please. This is a case of another one just around the corner in Hoskin Street, which looks like it's imperilled, as many of the others are. If we could have a look at the next photograph. This is another tree in Hoskin Street that went down several years ago. It was bulldozed down. So there's a lot of that sort of behaviour still going on, which I
Mr.
don't
Hartley,
think...
I'd need you to wrap it up because we've gone over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The final thing I'd mention tonight, in addition to the things I sent to council over the weekend and also put in my earlier submission, is the need for a good public database of council approvals of tree removed. It would assist people greatly if that information was publicly available, which it isn't now. Council officers are very responsive to requests for information on that, but it's not generally available, certainly not on Sundays.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson has a question.
Thanks, Mr.
Thank you.
Hartley. I didn't hear from you whether you actually support the officer's recommendation or the status quo.
Well, I think it depends on how council interprets these things, because I do have some concerns in relation to some of the proposal. I guess I'm on the no side.
So it's a no? Status quo?
Yes. Well, not status quo, just no to the proposed changes as they stand. I'd like to see consultation opened up again.
Thank you, Mr. Hartley. Councillor Franco has a question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hundley. I have two questions. One, could you explain the public database proposal that you've mentioned? I don't think that was in the submission to councillors. And precisely what do you think it should include? How might it work? What's the basis of it?
Well, thank you, councillor. I mean, when people observe the possibility of trees going down, the logical question to ask is whether any approval has been given for the removal of that tree. And that information is not generally available. You can, as I say, you can ring up council and that advice will be provided. But it would be very useful, and I think there is at least one council in the country that's actually done it, is to have that data available on a public...
Which council?
The one that I'm aware of is in Sydney. I'm not sure which one particularly, but I could track that down if there's any interest in it.
And my other question, it sort of follows on from Councillor Thompson's question. You responded that you're not in favour of the changes. I got the impression you were in favour of changes, but you just wanted more than what council was putting forward.
Yeah.
But would that be a more accurate?
I think that's a reasonable conclusion. That if the matter's to be opened up for discussion, then there's a lot more that could be done that hasn't been done.
But and my final question, Chair, what you want more than anything is more public consultation on the proposal. Is that
I think that's a valuable thing to do. I'm certainly in support of the increase in the fines that are now available under the Local Government Act. That's the one material change which is useful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. There are no more questions. You may return back to the gallery. Oh, sorry. One moment. We have a councillor online. Just missed it. Councillor Bigger. No? No. False alarm. Thank you. Thank you for that. You may return to the gallery. The next speaker this evening is Mr. O'Halloran. Mr. O'Halloran, please proceed with your name and suburb.
Good evening. My name's Anthony O'Halloran. I live in Kew. Thank you, councillors and Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity to get to speak in front of you tonight and listening to everybody's comments openly. I recently experienced the impact of the current tree laws, understand them better than most, the desire to preserve our leafy green neighbourhood. I've written to all the councillors here tonight over several years, and only 2 of you have ever got back to me or returned calls, and that was only relatively recently. One was only relatively recently. The current tree protection laws provided a platform for our home address to be published all over media, of which misinformation and half-truths were allowed to be circulated.
Mr. O'Halloran.
Media, hang
on.
on.
No, 1 second, please. I would like you to keep your comments to tonight's matter at hand, please. Well, it is important that we do that.
Part of the process was what the tree laws currently allow to happen. And I'm concerned that the council is listening to...
Mr. O'Halloran, this is... I need to explain this clearly. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to discuss what is proposed by the officers this evening. Okay. If you could keep your comments to that, that would be much appreciated.
I was just setting some background, but I'll move on.
Thank you.
I'm concerned that the council is listening to a vocal, entitled minority. There is 160,900 people living in Boroondara. There was 163 contributors, of which council officers say 87% generally supported the changes to the tree protection laws. Let's do the maths. This is 0.086% of the population living in Burring bothered to respond. According to council staff, 142 of these are in favour of strengthening the laws, or 0.085% of the population of Boroondara. If we do the demographics, a lot of the people are over, 70% were over the age of 50. This is not where necessarily where all this is where the future of Boroondara lies in young families. We're not hearing from those people. I don't believe what we've seen is a mandate to change the laws. Why do we have these laws in the first place? We are talking about private property, not public or Crown land. You talk of increased penalties, however, we do not discuss why people are cutting down trees. There may be very good reasons for these. Are the council's process too difficult? Are council officers too difficult? I know in my circumstances, there was no discussion with what our needs were living in our home or with a very large dangerous tree. In summary, council appears to be rushing these laws. There should be some heights put on the size of trees in residential properties. Council has not adopted or should adopt the Australian Standard AS 2870-2011, which refers to residential slabs and footings. Appendix H is a design guide for footings and effects of trees in the permit removal application and access, and there should be an independent third-party review process outside of council officers, as I don't believe that process after...
Thank you, Mr. O'Halloran. I gave you some grace because of the difficulty in the interchange. Councillor Franco, you wish to ask a question of Mr. O'Halloran?
Yes, thank you, Mr. O'Halloran. In your suggested approach, you've said, you mentioned these Australian standards that you think Could you explain what they are? It was very fast.
Well, the Australian standards recommends on guidelines on the size of, or the potential size of a tree and how close it should be planted to a house. So it'll take into the variety of the tree, the size that it can grow to, and therefore recommend a distance it should be planted away from a residential, therefore avoiding issues with footings, underpinning and other issues. So I'd have a look at that. I tried to get a copy of the standard today, but I couldn't get it.
And to be clear, is your proposal, what if a tree is already close within that guideline, or are you talking about future trees?
Okay, so there's two elements to that. One is in the permit, if somebody puts in an application to have a tree removed, then there should be some consideration for that. Is that a tree in an appropriate location for that house? Is that tree variety, is that tree? Because if the roots are invasive and have the potential impact to undermine the footings, short-term, long-term, that's an unfair impact on the homeowner to have to bear that cost.
Thanks. And one other question, Chair. Just in relation to your comment about an independent appeal panel.
Process.
So could you...
I don't believe that the current, and I appealed 3 times, and it was only on the 4th time that when I was able to, was given a permit to remove the tree.
Okay.
And I don't believe, and in my discussions with other people in the community, is that they don't believe it's at arm's length, right? You can't have a supervisor. Well, I'll give you one example. I had a supervisor. Sorry.
Can you be closer to the mic, sir?
Sorry, I had a supervisor at one stage. A junior arborist review his supervisor's work at one stage, and I wrote to Phil Story at the time and mentioned, I think this is a little bit too close to home. I think Phil would remember the emails. I've got copies of them still.
We can speak in generalities about what you would like to say.
Yep. I just don't think it's not independent, and the only avenue of appeal to appeal this is to go to the Supreme Court and challenge the administrative law that's involved.
Thank you.
It's an unfair burden for a taxpayer.
Councillor Franco, have you got an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. There being no further questions, Mr. O'Halloran, you may return to the gallery. Thank you for your presentation this evening.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker, now we begin the next 2 speakers are supporting the recommendation this evening by the council officers. Dr. Julia Cutts. If you could come to the horseshoe table and start with your name and suburb. Would you mind going to that mic? I know that one works.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't get around to printing.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Paul.
You may sit down.
My name's Julia Cutts and I reside in Kew East. And I'm here this evening because I believe the minor amendments proposed to the Burundara Tree Protection Law do not go far enough to ensure that Burundara's trees, including canopy trees and trees of cultural, historical and environmental significance, are protected for future generations. As well as concern about the inadequacy of penalties for the unlawful removal of trees, which I understand is largely a state-based concern, I'm particularly motivated by the recent, apparently lawful destruction of a 175-year-old...
No, Ms. Cutts, I don't like this evening for this become a forum speaking about individual items. We're here tonight.
Relevant.
No.
Councillor
Please
Scarborough.
listen to what I have to say before you continue. The purpose why we're gathering here tonight, there's a decision to be made about a paper that's been proposed, and I'd like you to speak to the paper proposed. You have heard what I've said to other speakers when they started speaking about items outside the agenda, and I would like you to stick to the agenda. Thank you.
This was a tree that was...
No. I would like you to stick to the agenda.
This is relevant because it is a situation where Burundara's laws were inadequate in protecting a tree that was listed on the significant tree register
But this
in
is
Burundara.
no. Again,
This tree was
can you
planted
please,
by my great-great-grandfather,
one
Thomas
second,
Cudd,
please,
a
Ms.
pioneer
Cutts,
of Kew.
I'm going to have to. That is an appalling thing to say to me. I have actually stopped people from saying things that are going to either be derogatory or cause harm. I'd like you not to continue down this path. If you're going to continue down this path, I will ask governance to provide me with the rules and regulations, to see how we'll move to the next stage. I will give you another chance if you'll be polite, and please speak to the issue at hand this evening.
Burundara's tree protection laws do not adequately protect trees on the significant tree register because currently there is a clause which provides for health and safety reasons for the removal of a tree. It is unacceptable that people can use this imprecise reason.
This still is not a comment about this evening's paper.
I support the amendments that are proposed, but I do not feel that they sufficiently reflect the concerns raised by the community in the report, and council needs to go further to ensure that trees listed on the significant tree register are protected. I'm concerned about the transparency around the process for applying for permits to remove trees. In the particular situation, I've had to resort to submitting an FOI request, so I look forward to receiving those documents. I now have further information about the correspondence that has been made between the CEO and particular applicants, so that's helpful information that will support my FOI request. So I call on Burundara Council to take seriously my suggestions that the particular clause that allows residents to apply for permits to have significant trees removed be removed. So sorry, I'm struggling with words because I'm struggling to know what I can say and what I can't.
We've passed the 3-minute time, Ms. Katz, and I had given clear directions about how the proceedings were going to continue this evening, and comments were about the paper at hand, not about other matters. I appreciate your time. Are there any questions, councillors? There'll be no further questions. Councillor Franco.
Yeah,
but we need to be obviously mindful as well how we approach this and make sure that we don't ask questions that...
Okay, just to be specific, not about any particular case, and the clause that you want addressed is a health and medical clause. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I understand because by a process of elimination, I've established that was the clause that was relied upon
Again, this is not fair to be speaking about an individual item. I'm going to stop it right there. Thank you, Ms. Katz. Thank you, Ms. Katz. You may return to the gallery. I'm going to end it. No, Ms. Katz, I understand you want to make a political point. I'm not going to hear that, okay? Members of the gallery are disrupting the meeting, and you are disrupting the meeting, and I did say that at the beginning to be respectful. That includes myself, but it includes every other councillor and every other person that's here. We cannot make statements that are singling out individual people. That is just not on, not if I'm in the chair. So I'm sorry to say that. This is not political, it's just human decency. And if you feel that way, so be it. Thank you very much for your presentation. The next speaker is Ms. Julie Mulhauser. Sorry, Dr. Julie. If you could start with your name and suburb.
I've got just a couple of slides to go with it. Good evening, my name's Julie Mulhauser.
Could you please get closer to the mic? Thank you.
My name's Julie Mulhauser. I live in Canterbury. Burundara's name comes from the Woiwurrung language. It means where the ground is thickly shaded. However, Burundara's trees are disappearing. On the slide above, it shows that in 2018, canopy tree coverage was at 20.6%, and over the 4 years prior, I'll just have the next slide, thanks. This slide shows that there was a 1.1 percentage point reduction in tree canopy, with large areas experiencing a 2 percentage point or higher loss. Almost all this loss was on private land and related to building development. Preventing further loss should be a high priority, and I have 5 propositions to achieve this. I believe that the effectiveness of the proposed tree protection law could be maximised. With 300 possible breaches annually, the current penalty isn't a deterrent. Where multiple parties are responsible, each should be penalised. Also, by instituting a time frame for remediation, a single breach could accumulate penalties until the notice to comply had been acted on. Secondly, all replacement trees need to have the same protections as the tree they replace. These protections could include adequate deep soil to reach a maturity similar to the tree it replaced, a tree protection zone area, and a permit for works or removal. Replacement trees should come from a species list chosen for resilience to a changing climate and to contribute to biodiversity. I also agree that the assessment of significant trees needs transparency and oversight in line with community expectations. Next slide. I also think that the barriers to owners who are doing the right thing by applying for permits it should be removed. I think the current fee application charges are too high. Lastly, I'd like to finish up with that we need a suite of local council measures to increase our urban forest and biodiversity, and this suite should include a better resource team of arborists. This expanded team can also supervise the conditions around replacement trees, educate and support owners of canopy and significant trees and our community. A more effective tree protection law on its own won't prevent further tree canopy loss, much less increase our urban forest or biodiversity. The Boroondara Council, I believe, has an urban greening strategy that is now overdue, and this should include tree canopy coverage and biodiversity targets and the actions to achieve these. The planning scheme, it's possible to include vegetation protection.
Thank you, Dr. Mohasa. I'd like you to wrap it up if you can. We've gone over time.
Yep, just in closing, councillors also have the capacity to be canopy tree champions in their communities. With a whole of council approach, Boroondara can once again be thickly shaded.
Thank you for your respectful presentation. There appears not to be any questions for you. You may return to the gallery. Thank you very much. We have completed the public presentations. Return to the offices for any matters arising. Mr. Elburn, would you like to take that?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Certainly a number of positions raised around the need for stronger opportunities, and I think to that there certainly are advocacy positions that Council have raised with the opposition and the current party in relation to the need for stronger penalties and other state controls. There's also an investigation underway in relation to planning scheme controls as a further opportunity to protect canopy trees. We heard concerns around balancing considerations around mobility and health and safety, and that the current local law does give provision for consideration of property damage, health and safety issues, and with that we need to balance whether there are reasonable things that can be done to address those issues. There are instances where we can seek independent arboricultural advice as well. There's certainly opportunities to publish decision outcomes, and we can provide council with information in relation to that, and opportunities to look at species planting lists, as well as potentially engage further advice on those lists. In relation to community engagement, we did publicise the proposed changes through Council's website, social media, community publications, in our community libraries, email alerts to our engaged Boroondara members, and we held 2 information sessions in relation to the proposed changes.
The CEO would like to say a few words. Ms. Dora.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just to make reference to the proposal put forward, I think by Mr Norton in relation to publishing details of applicants and the decisions which have been made, I just want to flag a concern which we would need to investigate in relation to the information privacy legislation and how that impacts on our capacity to actually do that. On the face of it, it sounds like a good idea, but under the planning legislation, we are required to keep a register which actually has that information in it. The same thing doesn't actually exist in relation to our local law. So we would need to explore whether that could in fact be done without breaching the information privacy legislation. I just want to make sure everybody understands the limitations of that and reinforce the fact that we have written to government for many, many years seeking changes to the penalties which can be applied. We've suggested it should at least be $20,000 a tree, and governments of neither persuasion have been willing to amend the legislation to allow for that to be achieved, which is one of the reasons we are now exploring the planning scheme as an alternative way of providing better protection for our trees.
Thank you for those clarifications, Mrs. Dora. Councillors, are there any questions for the officers? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question about one of the comments made by our final submitter tonight, where she asked about protection for replacement trees when a permit has been issued. And could you tell me what protections we give replacement trees and whether we follow up on these matters? And happy also, Chair, to move a motion at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Councillor Watson.
Through you, Chair. So yeah, we have a clause in the local law that protects replacement trees. The proposed update seeks to protect replacement trees that are required as a condition of a permit and as a condition of a notice to comply. So they get the same protection as a canopy tree. Permits required to remove them, you can't do work near them, and we follow up on those routinely. So we have a process currently in place where we issue reminder notices to permit applicants. For notices to comply, officers routinely go and inspect those trees when they're planted. And as part of a future program, we're looking to try and look at monitoring those on long term.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Gold.
Thank you, Chair. I thank you very much for your presentations tonight and your responses. I'm very clear that tonight's about summarising community responses to the draft document we have before us. But on page 12, you do mention under notification issues raised, which sort of raises the spectre there's other things that may need to be addressed. Are you able to expand on that comment tonight?
Thank you. And through you, Chair, perhaps there were some comments this evening around transparency and what is included at that section in the report. Gives options in relation to notification. So when a significant tree is sought to be removed, the opportunity to provide notice to neighbours of that application being made. There's options also to have those decisions referred to council for a decision in the relevant committee, and also consideration around notifying the tree owner when the neighbour is looking to do works close to that tree or prune that tree if it's overhanging.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Gold. Councillor Hollingsworth, you're next.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Mr Alborn, are you able to advise if there's anything in the state planning framework that stipulates a single dwelling, so where there's been, for example, an existing home, it's been acquired, it's been demolished, and then there's a building permit to build a new dwelling that's a single dwelling that doesn't necessarily need a permit through council, it can be done through a private building surveyor. is there any stipulation that there must be at least one canopy tree in the planning framework? Thank you.
The short answer to that is no. There is nothing in the building regulations that set out tree planting or landscaping as part of a building permit outcome.
Thank you. So is that something with advocacy, obviously through local government and also our community, that would potentially help improve that situation?
There is certainly advocacy in the sector that I'm aware of, and I believe Boroondara have included in that list that is being advocated on currently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Addis.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of the speakers effectively said that it's us and then it's the Supreme Court, that, you know, if they've exhausted the avenues with us, then the next step is Supreme Court, and I just was seeking some clarification on that.
Mrs. Dora?
That's correct. Under the local law, there is no recourse beyond council other than in relation to a point of law. And I think it was Mr O'Halloran who mentioned that would have to be in relation to the administrative law provisions and how they are either applied or not applied.
Okay, maybe then I need a follow-up question. How many steps of asking for reconsideration do we have? I believe it's a few, that it's not just a no and that's it. I believe there's opportunities for escalation to have it re-looked at.
There are a number of examples which have been referred to this evening where applicants have made applications, they've been rejected. They've then made further applications, often based on advice from officers about additional information which might assist. So you might end up with a second or third application on that basis. And generally on each occasion, you'll find there is something different which is submitted in order to produce a different outcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Dora. Thank you, Councillor Addis, for your question. Councillor Franco, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions for the officers. Could the officers comment on some issues that Mr. Solder raised regarding the impact that the policy would have on redevelopment of homes? I think the point was made that the new policy would further restrict or constrain development for a variety of reasons. Would you, I don't know if you've got your notes or you remember the comments. It'd be good to have some understanding around that.
Some nods there. Could you answer the question? Sorry.
Perhaps through yourself, Chair, I might make a brief comment on this and then ask Mr. Spencer if he might comment a little bit further. Essentially, the new tree protection local law makes no significant change to the triggers for a permit being required for the removal of a tree or the pruning of a tree. There are some small changes to the way that a canopy tree is measured to ensure that it's consistent with the Australian standards. So it may make a small difference to a very small number of trees, but in effect, it's really just to tidy up to ensure that it's consistent with the Australian standard. And that means that there's no change to the development outcomes in any substantial sense as a result of the new tree protection local law that's been proposed.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Councillor Franco, are you seeking anything further on that question, or
No, not on that one, unless,
please proceed with your other questions.
Unless the manager was going to add anything further. I have a couple of other questions. It gives a segue into the Australian standard. Mr. O'Halloran raised a question about the benefit of considering adopting or incorporating the relevant Australian standard. I wrote down the number, but I may have got it incorrect. Is that something that we currently consider? And do you have any views on that point?
Through you, Chair, the local law as it stands and as recommended does require us to have regard to property damage and unreasonable property damage. Certainly it would be appropriate to refer to that standard in consideration of that particular issue. So I wouldn't believe that there would be a need to explicitly reference it.
And two more questions, Chair.
Sure.
One, a topic that's come up, I think it was Mr O'Halloran and others have referenced a request for an independent appeals process, and I know Councillor Addis asked about the appeal. Is it fair to say that officers don't support or recommend going down that path? And could you provide any comment on the appeals process, and specifically on whether there should be a third-party independent appeals process?
Yeah, through you again, Chair. There's potentially opportunities to seek independent advice, and I believe there's occasions where that has occurred to assist in the decision-making when there is an appeal. The question of how much weight should be given to that is perhaps where we start to get into in considering a new model. There's issues of authorisation of a person that would be making making that decision if they weren't sitting in the council organisation. So there's perhaps some nuance that could be explored there.
Perhaps if I could just add to that to say that despite the experience Mr O'Halloran has referred to, the process should always be that the review is undertaken by a different and more senior officer in the organisation, one who has not had an association with the matter up to that point in time. And I'm certainly aware of examples where we've actually sought our own engineering advice in relation to the impact of tree roots on structures adjacent to, where trees are adjacent to dwellings, to try and understand what the implications might be. But as has been pointed out, part of the standard consideration is to understand the impact of tree roots on the stability of a structure. So that's already built into the way in which staff look at it. That's really the only way you can do it, short of requiring an approval or a permit for the planting of a tree in the first place, which enables you to then make that judgment call. Really the only way you can do it is the way it's actually unfolding.
Thank you, Mr Dora.
One final question. Mr McKillop raised a concern about disability concerns and gave an example. Is it, and I've reading here, I think the comments on page 34, is it reasonable to say that he referenced, Mr McKillop referenced a desire to see the Bayside model and posited that as a option that would resolve the issue? And here's a question for you, and without trying to go into one particular, I want to avoid going into that particular instance, but is it reasonable to say that what you're suggesting is the current model we have does incorporate disability concerns adequately or to some extent? Can you comment on that?
The answer to that, and through you, Chair, is that yes, in the existing provisions, there is an ability for us to consider health and safety. We need to balance that with the benefits of retaining the tree and that assessment of the tree, as well as whether works can be reasonably done to accommodate the issues that are being presented to us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Franco. Councillor Thompson, followed by Councillor Vigor.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the officers. Obviously we've heard a diversity of views from our community tonight, some for and against and some sort of halfway in between. Just for clarity perspective, given the framework of the local laws that we've got, and that's what at our hands at the moment, is the penalty of $4,000 as far as we can go from a legal perspective, from a practical perspective.
Mr. Dora, would you like to take that?
Perhaps I might just make two observations. One is that the value of penalty unit is actually set by the state government, not by council, and the number of penalty units which can be applied by council is generally the maximum we can apply. And so I think that translates into $3,800, is that correct? $3,800. So we cannot go beyond that. The other point just to make is that some of what you've heard tonight goes beyond the intent of the changes which were being considered. Some of them might go to the very essence of the way in fact you control trees. This local law amendment wasn't really designed to open up that question. And so if there were to be more significant changes required beyond what's here, that would require a completely fresh process, just so the community understands the limits of the council in considering some of these submissions.
So to that end, Mr. Storer, what is that process that you talk about? Are we talking about obviously advocation to the state with regards to the planning scheme, or is that something that we can control?
If you wanted to respond to some of the things which have been said to you, which question to some degree the very existence of a tree control, then what you would do is put a local law out for consideration to test whether the community in fact wanted to have such a tree control at all. And you would be opening yourselves up to some of the debates which were taking place right at the first introduction of the tree local law several years ago. But that would be a completely separate process. This was really only about some minor amendments, if you like, particularly to enable council to take advantage of the increased penalty, because the current penalty under the current local law maximum is $2,000, which is clearly inadequate. And we all agree it's inadequate, as is $3,800, but that's the most available to us.
So you've answered that question with regards to this is the ceiling to which we can elevate ourselves based on what the state provides to us. We're obviously also advocating to the state separately in terms of trying to get legislation to actually introduce tree protection laws into the planning scheme. That's correct?
Correct.
And that's a completely separate exercise.
Correct.
Will councillors have the opportunity to discuss the appeals process in any further detail before this comes before us again?
No.
That wasn't the answer I was hoping for, Mr. Storer.
Do you want a follow-up question, Councillor Thompson?
No. Okay, to that end, given that there are two separate exercises concurrently and they've been conflated in the presentations that we've heard tonight, I'm wondering whether the mover of the motion might seek to introduce a third clause that might just highlight that other process about advocacy to the state with regards to other protections, because ultimately getting it into the planning scheme provides us a whole lot of assurances that we simply don't have at the moment.
If it's of any assistance, rather than seeking to craft those proposals now, we can ensure they form part of what is put before you when this goes to council for adoption.
That would give me assurance, thank you. Yep, no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Bigger, you're next. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Actually, Mr. Storer's responses were quite helpful there for several of my questions. I did want to just clarify, I think that the last time this local law was reviewed was 2016. So the assumption, and I may have missed it in the paper, is that this is a 10-year review and would last for 10 years. Is that correct?
Thank you, Councillor Bigger. Mr.
Perhaps it would be fair to say that the key driver for this review was actually the fact that the current penalty is completely inadequate. With changes to the Local Government Act, additional penalties were able to be taken advantage of, but required that there be an amendment to the local law so that could actually be achieved.
So, okay, if I might continue, I'm sorry, I can't see you. So if you're telling me no, you'll have to be more clear about that.
You go ahead.
So then can I just check whether there's no expectation that anything else would occur in 2026 then, following this particular discussion?
If council's objectives in moving the controls into the planning scheme are achieved, you'll not require this local law.
Okay. If I might, just continue. I just had a question about the one of the residents, I think it was Mr. Huntley, mentioned a public database, and I think his thinking is sort of that if the community were more informed or more knowledgeable about what was happening in a particular circumstance with a particular tree, that might address some of the issues. But was your response, Mr. Storer, regarding the information privacy to that point, that you thought that was unlikely to be achievable because of privacy considerations?
More that I did not want to leave a false expectation. It's something which would require further investigation. My understanding of the question was that the possibility of creating a register which would be online is what was being put to us. And that, of course, would contain information about people's names, the application, the outcome of the application. And my initial concern about that is whether it would constitute a breach of the privacy legislation. Where you've got, like the Planning and Environment Act, a requirement to actually publish a register with those details in it, then clearly you're complying with the intent of legislation. In this case, the same obligation doesn't exist. So I'm suggesting we would need to investigate that, and we're happy to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Storer. Councillor Vigo, have you got any further questions?
I just had one more, probably for the officers. It was regarding some comments that Helen Slay made regarding sort of the type of trees. And I guess my clarification was just whether or not, my understanding is that we do actually provide quite a lot of advice to residents about this, but that's not necessarily reflected in this particular document, but might be, might not mean that, it doesn't mean that it's not occurring. And I guess I wanted to clarify whether that is a correct understanding.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Yes, at the moment we have a species list on our website. It's not through the local law itself, it's just education materials that we've provided to the community. The list provides a list of small, medium, large trees based on their climate resilience, heritage value, or whether they're native to the Boroondara itself. So, and the list will change over time as more species become available or we become aware of it.
Okay. Councillor Vigo, you have any
Yes,
further
thank you very
questions?
much. That's fine.
Thank you, Councillor Vigo. I have Councillor Watson, presumably
I think there are still questions, so I was put my light on when everyone else's lights were off, and happy to move the motion.
I have you in mind for the motion, but I've got a few others there, just in case you... Okay. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow on from Councillor Thompson's comments where Mr. Storer responded, and wondering if any additional dialogue that was put to strengthen this motion could actually reinforce not advocacy but continued advocacy, because I'm aware since certainly 2017 there's been multiple letters to multiple ministers of multiple parliaments, and Also, as councillors, we have opportunity to meet with elected reps of all parties, and I'm aware that we've always had very strong advocacy about more needs to be done to protect our trees and support conditions around planting of trees when trees have been lost. So I just wanted to ask if that could be reinforced with the comments you made, Mr. Storer.
Yep.
Certainly not the first time that, you know, we've talked about advocacy. Thank you.
It's taken on board. That's fine. Yeah. Councillor Franco, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it follows from officers' comments in relation to some questions that Councillor Thompson asked. If, and I don't know who best to address this, so I'll leave the officers decide who answers. If council were to move to seek to protect trees via the planning scheme and thereby making the local law redundant, what would it mean in relation to the appeals process? And I'm specifically referencing the request for a third-party appeals process. Would VCAT be an appeal body that would be relevant? And so that's the first part. And the second part, are there any other councils that have gone down the path of protecting trees through the planning scheme?
Thank you, Councillor Franco.
You're correct there, through you, Chair. An application for a planning permission, whether it be a dwelling or a single tree removal, would afford the applicant with appeal rights to the tribunal. And yes, certainly I'm aware of a number of councils that go a pure approach in terms of using the planning scheme only to protect their trees. There's several examples there, and different controls that apply. There's significant tree registers for registering individual trees or blanket controls.
Thank you.
Councillor Franco. Thank you. Having exhausted all questions, I'll come to you again, Councillor Watson. You indicated you wish to move a motion.
Yes, I do, Chair, as printed on the screen.
Councillors, do I have a seconder? Councillor Thompson.
Happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. To assist Councillor Watson and Councillor Thompson, is there any opposition to the motion? There be no opposition. Councillor Watson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you to members of our community who came in and presented to us tonight. This, as all of us around this table are aware, this is a very, very emotive issue in our community. It's an issue that people feel very strongly about. And as rightly pointed out, Boroondara got its name for being a very leafy place to live. So where have we landed with this motion? We've landed in the place of compromise, and that's not always the most comfortable place to be, because sometimes it means that you don't make anybody happy. And we have the two extremes, the two ends represented here tonight, where you have people who believe that a tree local law impinges on their private property rights. And then you have the other group who feel that a tree on a piece of private land creates significant public good, and for the public good, it must be protected. I think that this tree local law that we have before us tonight strikes an appropriate balance. I do look forward to going on the journey of discussing and reflecting on a tree overlay in our planning scheme. But that's not where we are tonight. Tonight we are considering amendments to our local law, and I believe that they will take us forward in protecting the trees that our community values, at the same time providing avenues of concern for people who own trees on their properties that they have concerns about and need to draw on expertise from council as to whether the tree is to be kept or removed via a permit. So I commend this motion to my fellow councillors tonight and for the amendment of our tree local law. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. There is no opposition, but happy if you say a few words or reserve your right. I'm happy to open it up to other councillors that wish to speak as well.
There's no opposition. Thanks, Chair. Look, I fully support this. I think it's clear from all of the residents that have presented to us, both tonight as also in the written receipt. This is a step in the right direction, but it's not the destination itself. I think the local planning scheme is where this is to go, and that's the next step I believe that this council should take to provide fairness, I guess, in the appeals process, as well as solidity that the legislation actually gives us at a local planning level. So I'll welcome this coming to us in a future council meeting, but also for the officers at that point in time to maybe identify the path to the next stage of this process. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. There appears to be no other light wishing to speak. I'll come back to you, Councillor Watson, if you want to say some final words.
Happy for the motion be put, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? The motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. And I might just say a couple of words. I appreciate the hard work done by the officers to move us in the right direction, and all the questions and presentations from the gallery. I think the key thing is to be respectful, even when we disagree. So on the whole, thank you for the very, very polite debate. The next item on the agenda is general business. Is there any general business? No general business? No urgent business? And there'll be no confidential business? We've come to the end of the meeting. Before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank all of you who have joined us this evening, and I declare the Service Delegated Committee meeting closed. Thank you.